There's a kind of silence that doesn't just fill the air, it presses on your chest like a memory you forgot to carry. That morning, Joe woke up before the rooster did. The sun hadn't broken the horizon yet, but something in the air made his old bones twitch. Not the cold, not even pain. It was stillness, heavy stillness, the kind you feel before a bad phone call or when a storm hides behind a blue sky. The breeze that usually danced through the cornfields stood still, like the earth was holding its breath. Even Duke, his dog, refused to chase the sparrows this time. Just sat there on the porch, ears up, eyes fixed on something invisible. Joe took off his hat and ran his fingers through his silver hair. He'd seen droughts, floods, even fire, but this felt different. He looked up. The birds weren't flying east today. They were circling, and deep inside him, somewhere between his ribs and his regrets, Joe heard the voice of his father whisper, "When the silence gets louder than the wind, listen close, son." So he did, and what he heard next would change everything. The road to Elijah's cabin hadn't changed, still winding, still lined with the bones of trees long dead. Joe hadn't driven it in years, but something about the dream had tugged at the past like a thread finally gone taut. He didn't call ahead. He never needed to. When he arrived, Elijah was already standing outside, leaning on his cane like he'd been waiting. His beard was longer now, streaked with ash gray, but those eyes were the same, heavy, sharp, too used to seeing what others chose to ignore. "You came," Elijah said softly. Joe stepped out of the truck. "Had a dream," he muttered. "Didn't feel like a dream." Elijah nodded once. "Storm's been whispering again. I heard it last week." Joe frowned. "You still say stuff like that?" Elijah didn't smile. "I never stopped." Inside the cabin, the air smelled like cedar and old warnings. Elijah poured 2 cups of something dark and earthy, then sat opposite Joe without ceremony. "The prophecy we forgot," Elijah said, voice low. "It didn't forget us." Joe looked up slowly. "You remember the fire, the signs? I tried to forget." Elijah's voice tightened. "But it didn't forget you." A long silence hung between them. Outside, the wind picked up, slow and deliberate, like something breathing in. And somewhere deep inside Joe, a rusted door creaked open. When Joe got back to town, something was off. Main Street looked the same, kids on bikes, the restaurant bustling, the old gas station humming. But beneath it all, there was a quiet tension, like a held breath that never lets go. The first thing he noticed was the clock above Murphy's Hardware. It had stopped, not just paused, but frozen at 3 minutes and 17 seconds. Strange, he thought. The next day, the school bell did the same. Then his wristwatch, always 3 and 17. The second signal came with the birds, flocks of them flying south early. Too early. Even the seniors sitting outside the barbershop muttered, "It's not right. Not yet." Then came the river. No rain, no storms. But the river rose, inch by inch, day after day. Joe stood on the bank, his boots in the mud, watching the current grow restless like a living thing. People said the weather was strange, faulty electrical wiring, migratory quirks. But Joe had seen enough seasons to know when the wind was just wind, and when it brought a warning. At night, he sat by the window, listening not to the crickets or the owls, but to the silence that enveloped the city like a shroud. He pressed against the glass. He breathed. He remembered Elijah's words, the prophecy we forgot. It didn't forget us. And now, it was leaving fingerprints everywhere. The next morning, Joe stood at the edge of the overgrown lot where the old church leaned into the wind. Like a tired sentinel for 20 years, no one had stepped inside. The town said it was haunted. Others just wanted to forget what had happened there. But Joe couldn't ignore the pull. He gripped the rusted handle and pushed. The door groaned. surrendering slowly to memory. Dust spiraled in beams of cracked sunlight. The air smelled like time-old wood, mold, and something faintly metallic, like dried blood. He didn't know what he was looking for, only that Elijah had once spent hours here alone, in silence, scribbling things no one cared to read. In the back, beneath the pulpit, Joe found a loose board. Beneath it, a box wrapped in oilcloth. Inside, a journal, leather-bound, weather-worn, pages filled with Elijah's slanted writing. "They won't believe me," one entry began, "but the signs are converging. The clock, the birds, the river, the storm won't be of rain but of reckoning." Joe's hands trembled. He flipped to a page marked with a torn ribbon. The prophecy can't be stopped, but it can be faced if someone chooses to see what others refuse to. He sat there for a long time, the weight of the words sinking deep. This wasn't paranoia. This was preparation. Then came the sound, distant, muffled, but growing drums, no thunder. The kind that didn't echo from the sky but from the earth beneath. And in that moment, Joe knew walking into this church wasn't just curiosity. It was the one choice that changed everything. Joe didn't sleep that night. He sat on the edge of his bed, the journal on his lap, rereading the same page over and over. It wasn't just the content, it was the feeling behind the words. Like Elijah had written them with urgency, like he knew time would betray them both. The next morning, the air outside felt hollow. Birds didn't sing. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. He walked downtown, journal clutched to his chest. People passed him like ghosts, blank faces, empty stares. The baker's bell didn't ring when he opened the door. The usual warmth of cinnamon and chatter was gone. No one said a word, not even Martha, who always greeted him with that familiar smirk. Joe whispered, "Can you feel it too?" But no one answered. Not because they didn't hear, because they didn't know how to. Back at home, he flipped through Elijah's entries, trying to match the signs to the day. Then he found it. When the town forgets how to feel, the whisper becomes a scream. He looked out the window. The clock tower had stopped at 9:17, just like Elijah had written in bold, "When the hour freezes, the truth unfreezes." Joe grabbed his coat and rushed outside. That's when he heard it. Not thunder, not drums. A hum, low, vibrating through his spine. And then a voice, not outside, but inside him. They must remember, before it's too late. Joe staggered back, clutching his head. He wasn't losing his mind. The prophecy wasn't coming. It was already here, whispering louder, waiting for someone to finally listen. No one warned Joe that knowing the truth would feel like drowning in silence. They always talk about the moment it all makes sense, but they never mention the ache that comes with it, the weight of seeing what others refuse to see. As the town carried on, children laughing, doors opening, lives pretending to be normal, Joe stood still, stuck between two worlds. One where ignorance was comfort, and another where truth was a burden. He tried to speak to Pastor Reed, tried to read from Elijah's journal, but every word fell like stones. Reed just smiled politely, the kind reserved for lost souls. That is what no one tells you. Truth doesn't always set you free, it often isolates you first. Joe sat alone by the edge of the wheat field that evening. The wind was back, but this time it whispered questions he couldn't answer. Why him? Why now? Why were they all so blind? He flipped to the final pages of Elijah's journal and saw a single line, circled in ink. The hardest part of seeing is watching those you love walk toward the edge, smiling. And Joe knew the choice wasn't just his anymore. Some storms don't roar and they whisper. And by the time you realize it was a warning, not just wind, it's already too late. Joe still stands by the edge of that field every evening, watching, waiting not for the prophecy to come true, but for someone to listen before it does. Because maybe this story wasn't about him. Maybe it was about you. What if the signs were never meant to scare you, but to wake you? Look round before the storm finds you smiling at the edge. Would you hear it this time?